Thank you for giving up your lunch hour for this very, very important session. Why are we talking about the rise of Chinese philanthropy here at the annual meeting of New Champions in China in 2019? Well, two very, very good reasons. First of all, it is a highly impactful area of activity in its own right. Recent research suggests that between 2010 and 2016, donations from the top 100 philanthropists more than tripled, reaching 4.6 billion. The number of registered foundations in the meantime surged from 5,000 to 5,000, a 400% increase over a decade. And so we have increasing donations, and we have a number of billionaires also rising, and we have a number of social enterprises rising at 17% in 1 year alone between 2017 and 2018. It's a very, very active and dynamic sector, of course. So we want to learn more about that, but we also want to learn more about Chinese philanthropy in the global context. Of course, recently there have been criticisms of philanthropic giving. So whilst China is being regaled as the next big impact powerhouse, we also read headlines about in the US of philanthropy propping up a broken system and carried out by people that purport to change the world but actually want to keep it the same. So there's a diversity of opinion emerging here, and possibly a diversity of paths of philanthropy between different empires and economies during the world. My name is Oliver Cann. I'm the head of strategic communications. I have a glittering panel to discuss this in a very short 30-minute period. Mr. Wang Bing is the founder of the IU Foundation, based here in the People's Republic of China, of course. Elizabeth Knup, you are the country director and chief representative of the Ford Foundation, based here in China again. And Wang Jiakai, you're the vice president and chief representative officer in China of United Way Forward, a US organization, and you're also a young global leader. So Mr. Wang, I'd like to start with you, and I'd like, first of all, if you could give us some insights into why you believe philanthropy is growing as fast in China, and what kind of form this growth is taking.
Chinese philanthropy recently make great progress compared to the years before. We can see several key characteristics with Chinese philanthropy. For one, China's internet has developed for 2 decades and has changed China in fundamental ways. In the internet application, I think China has surpassed that of the US and EU. We have around 100 million people in China using internet. After so many years application and implementation, we see internet is through every part of our life. So does philanthropy. In United States, we say everyone do charity, but they do that through emails, through promotions. But for China, we see a lot of such donation happened online. Those online philanthropy donation increased so fast, especially with the platforms like Tencent and Alibaba. They brought great change to China's philanthropy. We have what we call thumb economy. With simple touch of your finger, you can do your donation very easily. So I would say the first fundamental change is brought by the internet. Secondly, after reform and opening up, the first generation of entrepreneurs gradually change from focusing on their business to trying to hand over the wealth to the next generation. For example, we have Meidi family or Lu Guanqiu family. We also involved in one of their philanthropy projects of helping the farmers and agricultures. So we can see the first generation of entrepreneurs start to get involved in foundations or the other trust and project. Jack Ma from Alibaba started to have a foundation for countryside education. So this elite would like to do more work through the foundations by inheriting their wealth to the next generation in a continuous way. So our foundation was the first foundation in China. We are already 15 years old. What I found in the recent years, we see more business people coming into the philanthropy area. We see many foundations emerging. For example, IU used to be the first one, but right now they say there are more than 8,000 foundations. In China, we have 800,000 social organizations, 1.3 million organizations for volunteers. In China, we have 158 person times get involved in the volunteering work or donation. So you can see all of this reflects the recent progress of Chinese philanthropy.
Thank you, Ms. Wang. If I could ask a follow-up question, what trends are we seeing in the areas of giving and of philanthropic activity? You mentioned Mr. Ma and his passion for education. Are we seeing various areas of interest, key areas of education that are attracting a lot of funding, or is there a diversity to where the money is being donated and invested?
I will see the following trend. Number one goes to education. I talked about Jack Ma. He focused on countryside education. You see, he has been subsidizing countryside schools, and he donated 100 million to the countryside teachers in Tibet. So Jack focused on education. Second part is healthcare. Healthcare is particularly important in China with rising demand, especially you see the tier 1 cities in China enjoys better healthcare resources, but if you go to the remoter areas, tier 5 or 6, those areas have no access to good healthcare resources. So foundations like IU would like to help those underprivileged kids to go to the big cities in China to enjoy better doctors and better healthcare resources. And the third trend is we would like to use technology to do philanthropy and charity, especially the use of big data, blockchain, internet, or online is already the past. Now we talk a lot about big data and blockchain, and we have made many trials. Here in China, as I said, maybe we use internet more widely than the United States or the EU. So internet application had been used widely for philanthropy and charity, and many of the foundations move from offline to online, including IU. We already started to do robot Q&A machines, AI assisted, blockchain donation. So anyone who donates at any time or any place, you can see all of this information on the blockchain and it cannot be tampered. Those are the major trends I witnessed for China philanthropy.
Thank you. And one final question, because this is so fascinating. I hope it is for you. It is certainly for me. For the IU Foundation itself, what is the strategy? What is the ultimate goal?
I will say for IU Foundation, for the past 15 years, we would like to dedicate to another way out compared to old China government-initiated foundation. We were founded in 2004. We were composed by business people. We want to bring in certain business factors like efficiency or high tech. That is our target. Secondly, we hope China's philanthropy, we separate agriculture, industry, internet or big data eras in China's past economy. But I hope with this big data or high tech, the China philanthropy can help to improve the remote areas in China. We do average help or industrial evaluation to a more open, transparent, data-driven, technology-driven philanthropy. It seems that we have an overall trend. Number three, with development of economy and better government aid, we do not have such high demand of regular help with the support from central government and local government. What China really needs is to solve an even greater social question. So instead of helping individuals, we move to try to help bigger social issues like the infant healthcare, whether they can have access to healthcare resources, whether they can afford these therapies. In the past, we take hospitals as our partners. For example, we donate to Shanghai Children's Hospital 100 million yuan. So we used to help the Chinese infant in terms of their congenital heart disease or the birth defect. But now we move further to train the young doctors to help with the community or support healthcare technologies. So we would like to solve the fundamental issues of the social problem instead of only helping individual cases. We would like to do things in a larger scale, in a more systematic way, and to support government policy development.
Yeah, that's a fascinating insight. And I think what we can all tell here is that there is a degree of disruption going on in China, and even leapfrogging with the way that the sector has been kick-started by the internet and has enabled a much more rapid accrual of giving that took decades in other parts of the world. But it's changed tack slightly. And I should also say that I would like as many questions as possible, so we'll try to leave as much room for questions, and please be thinking about what you would like to ask. But Elizabeth, I want to come back to you now and address the other issue, which is where philanthropy sits in today when we look at a world of, let's face it, growing challenges, whether it's environmental, whether it's societal, etc., whether it's economic. There are people, and of course, we've all read Anand Giridharadas' book, Winner Takes All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World, which is which it takes the approach that actually philanthropy is really keeping the same system, and that system is broken, it's not trying to fix it. And how is that, what kind of impact has that had on the sector you're in?
Broadly, not just in
Broadly,
China.
yes.
Right. So you can be sure that everyone in the Ford Foundation has read that book, Winners Take All. In fact, our president is highly featured in the book, a whole big chapter of talking to him. So I think that book raises some really interesting questions. I'm not sure that the conclusions can be applied across the board. I would say a foundation like the Ford Foundation, which was established in 1936, has its own endowment of $13 billion. And the way that we generate the income for our grant making is through investing that into an economic system that exists, while our grant making is intended to disrupt the drivers of inequality. And the sort of contradiction there we're not missing that contradiction. And so there really is something to be sorted out when it comes to the way philanthropies in the United States are able to continue to exist by relying on an economic system that may actually be the key contributor to the inequality that we're seeking to address. So the Ford Foundation doesn't feel like it makes sense to close our doors and disappear. Rather, we think it's important to, number one, be quite aware of this contradiction. We now invest 10% of our endowment for impact, so we agree to take a lower financial return in order for a higher social impact with our endowment, as well as our grant making. So this is the way our president says 5% of our assets are working every year for positive social change. What about the other 95%? That's our endowment. So how can you use the endowment in ways that are aligned with your mission. So that I think a lot of foundations in the US are thinking about. I think that book also critiques forums like this one, right? So the World Economic
Indeed,
Forum
which is why we're here
and
to talk about
Davos and places like that bring together people like us, educated, relatively wealthy, relatively worldly and mobile. And we sit here and we think we can come up with the ideas. And I think part of his critique was that we fail to understand the role that government can and should play in sort of shaping good outcomes for people across our societies. So I do think that there is something that we all need to kind of take on board and think about, that just because we're here and we're smart and we have money doesn't mean that we're the only people who can solve social problems, and alignment with government and alignment with other parts of society is important. And I think that's, when you bring this all into the Chinese context, one thing that I think is a characteristic of Chinese philanthropy is the way in which in China the government is a large actor and a large player in addressing social issues, and philanthropy and civil society are accompanying the government along the way. So a lot of this education, healthcare, poverty alleviation are really high environmental protection, high-level goals that the government has set here for China, and philanthropy and civil society participate to help deliver those outcomes. So I do think that that's an important aspect of philanthropy in China right now. I do think one thing that we all need to be careful of is this idea that business models are the only things that can actually solve social problems, right? In China, there's a big debate about whether philanthropy should use business models, models that come out of enterprise and business to solve social problems as being more efficient, more practical, more effective, versus more traditional NGO-driven, civil society-driven solutions. And I think that's a discussion in the US too, that book also kind of raises. And I think that we need to be careful to not completely disregard the non-business model approaches to solving social problems. There are some things that are not going to be solved by a business model, by a social enterprise. They have to be funded by philanthropy, by grants, to allow them to be successful. And these get closer to, the business models help with service delivery and other things that are more related to advocacy and rights of certain vulnerable groups probably don't have a solid business model that could promote them, but rather do rely on grant making. So I think we have to, in this sector, combine both and not exclude one or the other from our toolkit of how we're going to try to promote social change.
That's great. That's actually a very, very sweeping and very precise contextualization of the difference between the country where the Ford Foundation is domiciled and here in China. Let's go back to China. Jiakai, you work for a US organization, but what's your outside-in view on the future of philanthropy here, and what's your advice to the growing number of philanthropists that are emerging every year in this country?
I think Mr. Wang has touched on a lot of the future things already. Digital philanthropy is definitely a very important area. And talking about United Way, for people here that not quite familiar with United Way, we are a 132-year-old organization, and we fundraise. Last year we fundraised about 5 billion, close to 5 billion US a year. Very traditional model. And even a traditional organization like United Way, we are also going through the digital transformation process ourselves. 2 years ago, we had a partnership with Salesforce, and we're hoping to bring the 10 million donors from offline to online, because we believe that other than the donations that they gave us, their background, their profile, their ethnic group identity, their professional career stage, all these information for us, that's important too. So digital philanthropy, that's one. And two is we do see more and more young people are becoming active in the philanthropy sector, because traditionally people have this stereotype, right? You are a successful business man or woman, you very established, and then once you retire, then you spend more time in the philanthropy sector. But these days, we actually have a perfect example here in the room. My fellow YGL, Amy, she's started her own foundation, and she's doing a fantastic job.
Where's Amy? Which one's Amy? Amy.
Sorry. So we do see more and more people like Amy, right? She's very young. She's still active in the business world, but she allocates her time in the philanthropy sector, and we do see more and more of that. And also, Mr. Wang mentioned that we do see more and more diversified interests in the philanthropy sector, because traditionally, disaster relief, that's probably a big part of the sector. My first job, actually the job that got me into the nonprofit sector is Yuan Foundation. And disaster relief is a big part of what Yuan Foundation does. But these days, you see more and more diversified interest. Conservation is a big part of the sector now. And also, recent years, gender equality. That's a big topic as well. So you do see more and more people are willing to spend time and donate money in areas that, traditionally not the big areas. As for advice, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, Chinese entrepreneurs, philanthropists, they are very goal-oriented, and they want their money, to go to projects, which is understandable. But I do want to sort of, I hope that people development can be part of the conversation as well, because just like all the other sectors, having like good talents in a sector, is probably, the most important thing for many organizations. So I really hope, for a lot of the domestic foundations, domestic nonprofit organizations, I do hope that more and more resources can be allocated to develop talents. And also international exchange. As Mr. Wang said that, the first generation entrepreneurs are starting to think about philanthropy and pass their business onto the second generation. But philanthropy has been a big part of the sort of the society, for decades in the US. So I do think that there's a lot to learn from other peer philanthropists in the US. And we are actually, cultivating a lot of the exchanges ourselves. Next month, August, actually, we're part of the China Philanthropy Circle, and there will be a group of Chinese philanthropists visiting US. We'll be meeting Bill Gates and also the Rockefeller Foundation and Ford Foundation. We are hosting a lunch in New York on Friday, August the 9th, and we hope we bring some of United Way's donors and philanthropists and see how they can exchange ideas and mindset. Last but not least is money is not the only way to engage, because oftentimes, the organizations I served, they will write you a big check, but then they're like, don't bother me, right? I'm busy, I have a big organization to run, but their leadership and their experience, their contacts, their know-how, and all the technical capabilities of their organizations, I think that's tremendously helpful for a nonprofit organization as well. So I do hope that other than, in addition to the 2 times a year, like the board meetings, they can spend more and more time with the organization, even be a mentor for some of the staff for their organization. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Let's have a quick sweep around the room, see who wants to ask any questions. Okay, lady at the front. Okay, we'll try to do these 4. Time is flying, unfortunately, so let's just limit it to 1 question each, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Deepali Khanna. I work with the Rockefeller Foundation, and as you all know, we have a very rich history here in China. Came here over 100 years ago. We're part of building up the modern medicine journey in China, so it's really exciting to see and listen to all of you. We've recently released a report on the China philanthropy landscape, as well as been trying to understand the sustainable finance landscape and how the second generation philanthropy can be playing a more active role in the innovative finance space. So my question is really around how can foundations such as ours really be is there any role for us to really be supportive of what the philanthropists in China are trying to do? Of course, the exchange visits are happening. We're very excited about you coming over with the philanthropists. But I think what we've learned also is that, how do we collaborate amongst philanthropists? So we've launched the Collaboration for Impact, which is really at a global level. Are there...
So this is a question about scaling up philanthropy through better collaboration.
Exactly.
Right,
And, what's the role for foundations such as Ford and Rockefeller?
Scaling up, right. Let's move on because we haven't got a lot of time. Sorry, Mum. Let's go take the mic over there, and we'll finish with that gentleman there.
Hi, I'm Ryan from Japan. So given the fact that the government plays a big role in philanthropy, why does China need a different organization like yours? What's the main difference between the role government plays and the role social sectors plays?
Okay, so that's the role of philanthropy versus the role of the government and the public sector. Right, good question. Lady there, please.
I'm Giselle Tamben from Cameroon. I would like to know how you define the philanthropy here. Is it, what is your geographic coverage? Are you inside the country, outside of the country? How do you select those you work with?
And who's that question directed at, Mum? Who would you like to ask that question to? Okay, okay. And finally, sir, in the blue shirt.
Hi there, I'm Jesse Appel from the U.S.-China Comedy Center. We use comedy to connect Chinese people with the West and hopefully bridge the word through laughter. What we're looking to do is fundamentally across oceans and across countries and also across cultures of philanthropy, and we work in the market too as a social enterprise. So I feel kind of overwhelmed with how to get all of the different systems and cultures from the different nations and also the market into one coherent model for how to run a group. And if any of you have advices on how to do that, I would be super happy.
The one-size-fits-all model.
Well, I mean, if there are any advices on how to make it work, yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Sure.
You're making us all laugh with that ambitious idea. Okay, so where should we start? Let's start with the this question here about scaling up. Elizabeth, I think you're the perfect person to start off with this one. How do we scale? How do we get greater scale for philanthropic efforts through better collaboration in the sector?
So actually, Dipali and I talk about this all the time. So maybe she wants to hear from somebody else besides me. But I do think that I think there's some experience that foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation and Ford have in their 80-plus year history that is not only experience in thinking strategically about grant making, but also issues of governance of foundations and sort of how to build capacity in institutions and talent, as you point out. So I think there's some experience that not only American foundations, but foundations from around the world that have been in existence for more than 10 or 15 or 20 years can bring, and that we also need to be open to the innovation in philanthropy that's happening in China as a contributor to a global sort of advancement of the philanthropic sector, right? It's not that because we're 80 years old we have all the answers. It's because we're 80 years old we have some experience. We need to learn and we need to share. And so I think trying to figure out platforms for where those kinds of exchanges can take place is really critical, and there are some. And I think that not only having individual platforms, but thinking if there's a way to link them together into sort of broader dialogue and conversation would be a way to scale up the not just impact, but scale up the sort of exchange of ideas and the mutual learning that I think is really important.
And that, of course, that segues into your question, sir, about how do we get a working model where we can all work together and kind of be much more effective by finding that that sweet spot. It's a pretty confusing place. Regulations are different from territory to territory, et cetera, et cetera. So can we help? Can we help? Is it Jeff? Was it Jeff? Yes. Jesse. Can we help Jesse?
So I think I know what Jesse's trying to do. Bridge the communication through laughter. I think that there's some really key things to think about when we all come together, right? And we really have to listen carefully to one another and understand what each other is talking about. So when you say 公益慈善 in Chinese, philanthropy, that actually has a slightly different meaning than the word philanthropy does in English. And if we assume that we mean the same thing, we're going to just go down a pathway of not really being able to work together. So I think it's really important that we all remember that we need to be clear about what it is we're talking about. And just takes a lot more time and a lot more work to make sure that you're communicating well in a small organization or in a big platform. And I just feel like that's just a lot of just work we have to put in, and there's no way around it. And so I guess my suggestion, my recommendation or advice to you would just be spend more time making sure that everybody's clear about what they mean when they speak to one another. And I think that'll make a big impact.
And look, time is moving on. We're actually over time, and that's almost a cardinal sin around here in Switzerland, where we're from. But let's do those other two questions, and perhaps Mr. Wang, you could help us with the question of the gentleman here in the front row around the role of the philanthropic sector and also the role of the state.
我觉得综合回答一下。
Okay, allow me to give a summary of all of the questions. When you say philanthropy, you need to also bring up the concept of charity. When we say philanthropy, what we mean here in Chinese means the rich help the poor. But charity means something who can benefit the overall society, who can empower the entire economy. It is like a cause. Philanthropy is more individual. Charity is more like a social cause. Going back to the second question about entrepreneurs and talents, the lady from Rockefeller Foundation had a very good question. I think we have a lot of cooperation. Me, myself, is one of the Rockefeller Global Philanthropist member, and we are many leading donors where the Rockefeller family helped to subsidize many of the Chinese NGOs. We do have a lot of cooperations. So taking a broad view of this issue, I would say the spirit of any other foundation should be its founder. For the mature foundations in the United States, Ford, Rockefeller, or Carnegie, or Next Generation, Gates Foundation, or Zuckerberg Foundation, you may refer here as the third generation. You can see these are the foundation driven by successful entrepreneurs. And the core is, as you just pointed out, these entrepreneurs have the entrepreneurship that is needed in the society. It is innovative, disruptive. The founder understands the business. He focused on efficiency, the KPI. The entrepreneurs are born with these advantages which are needed by the philanthropy. You also mentioned the talents. Talents are in great need for China. Compared to EU and US, as the other gentleman just mentioned, major issue for China philanthropy is we need more people. For IU Foundation, for many years, we want to build up ourselves as a comprehensive platform. We subsidized more than 120 NGOs by the categories of 100,000, 1 million, and 10 million. And we do not give them any target. They can use the money to cover any cost or education or training. We also have a special philanthropy university. Last year, we have more than 3,000 NGOs in China empowered by our university. So for China philanthropy, I would say the most important thing is we need to have more entrepreneurs, leaders with entrepreneurship. We need more talent get into this area so we can have more business element or technical element in philanthropy. That is how we can support the overall development.
We're perilously short of time, but anything you'd like to add? Because I saw you put your hand up a few minutes ago.
I'd like to go back to the scaling piece. United Way, we are a network of 1,800 local United Ways. So I do think we can share one thing or two about how to aggregate the learning and the best practices from each one of the local United Ways. So that's number one. And number two is on the China angle. The partnership between United Way and Salesforce was 2 years ago, but our president and CEO, Brent Gallagher, when he spoke to me about our China digital strategy, he said, Jiakai, I'm pretty sure that you would have a very different technology that's way more advanced than we have in the US. So please do not limit your ideas to Salesforce. Go and explore all the available options you have in China. So I think it is very important for an international organization really to have the local knowledge and local aspect in order to scale. I think that goes back to some of the things that Elizabeth said as well.
Now, Jiakai, you talked about the philanthropy and giving and charitable works not being about having a name above a building. And I think it's a great point, and all three of you have mentioned talent and the need to invest in people and small projects and big issues as well to get to the heart of them. I mean, I think that's a very good message to see, for us to go away and having learned a little bit more about how philanthropy is developing here. Much like in the early days of the philanthropism in the US, of course, when infrastructure was built by the likes of the great industrialists. So at that, regrettably, we have to close this session. We do have to all move on to other things, but thank you so much for joining us here on the panel. Thank you for watching us and joining in and taking part here in the room, and also those of you that watched live online.